We have invited, like I said, two amazing creatives, one of whom is an architectural poet, LionHeart, sitting right there. And he will be joined by Shumi Bose, who is an architectural educator, critic, thinker, challenger, and so much more. While I've said this, you could come over on stage and join us. The idea is that each of them is going to deliver a monologue, one in poetry and one in prose. They're sitting together, but they're not actually talking to each other. They're sitting together and they're talking to you. So these individual monologues coming your way will actually meet dialogically because you will be hearing them one after the other. So they are in dialogue, but through you. And that is a tiny attempt from us at making the public and the thought and the people and the creatives all part of one sort of a discourse. So thank you so much for taking this up on our request, such last minute as well. With that, I leave the stage to you.
Thank you, Samtha. So bear with us, this is experimental. I'm going to start by reading you a story. The Krenak are kin to the Javante, the Kraho, the Kayapo. We are a J people. So let's say that we are hunters, not growers. I believe that the cosmovisions and mindsets of hunter-gatherers still persist, even in adverse situations in which there's nothing left to hunt or gather. In contemporary times, these traditions still have a direct connection with our subjectivity. So hunters dream in one way, and farmers in another. There's an ancient story of the Krenak people which describes how the Creator left humanity here on Earth and went to some other place in the cosmos. One day, he remembered us and said, "Oh, I left my creatures there on Earth. I need to see what they've become." But as he made this incredible gesture to come here to see us, he thought, what if they've become something worse than I can conceive? The best thing would be to not have a personal encounter with them. Here's what I'll do. I'll shapeshift into another creature to see my creatures. He then transformed himself into an anteater and went out into the meadow until a group of hunters, armed with cudgels and ropes, approached some bushes, attacked him, caught him, and took him back to the camp with the obvious intention of eating him. Two twin children who were watching the scene prevented him from being taken to the fire pit. He revealed himself to the boys, who covered up his escape before the adults could find out. From the top of a hill, the boys cried out, "Grandfather, what did you think of us, your creatures?" And God answered, "So-so." The Krenak notion of the human creature is precarious. Human beings have no certifiable quality. They can go wrong. The notion that humanity is predestined is nonsense. No other animal thinks like that.
Tension is a genesis, a world preceded by the pulling and pushing of difference. Here in the middle, the liminal is the cornerstone of all negotiations. All misunderstandings are middle grounds for binaries. But what about the synergy of intersections? Who is to say left and right isn't a game of mirrors and positioning? Until now, a facade has never been in such close proximity to this degree of truth. I like to think this too is a profession of mutualism. I would like to say that it is a sum of many parts, but some nights it's hard to see people as mediums, even though we're estranged cogwheels. We are tectonics on non-talking terms. Architecture is a path, a discourse of master planning. We only exist because something once existed, a seed, a city, a history of interconnectivity. We are seams finding sinews. We are the needle poking holes in reasons not to laugh because we need to, we need it. Humility is the joinery of our humanity. Architecture is a branch of new psychology, a neurodichotomy, a split custody, a tug of war of indifference, balancing scales of good and bad ideas. The seams reveals all. Like architecture, we aren't the lies we create, but we are their proof. A junction is just a hybridity of possibility. Who do we become? Because these options are available to us.
Renaming was one of the principal instruments with which colonists erased the prior meanings of conquered landscapes. In New England, soon after the Puritans had exterminated the Pequot, they applied themselves to the task of cutting off, in John Mason's words, the remembrance of them from the earth, by erasing the tribe's name. To that end, the General Assembly of Connecticut decided that the survivors would not be allowed to call themselves Pequots, that Pequot River would become the Thames, and that the village known as Pequot would be renamed New London, in remembrance, the legislators declared, of the chief city in our dear native country. In such acts of renaming, the adjective new comes to be invested with an extraordinary semantic and symbolic violence. Not only does it create a tabula rasa erasing the past, but it also invests a place with meanings derived from faraway places, our dear native country. Sometimes the erasure of meanings that accompanied the remaking of the Americas springs unexpectedly out of the landscape. So it did for me many years ago when I pulled off a highway to take a look at Four Corners, a monument that marks the only spot in the US where 4 states meet: Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. The monument lies off Route 160, which traverses some of the most beautiful landscapes on Earth. The mountains, canyons, and deserts it passes through are so luminous that it's easy to understand why the landscape came to be invested with a metaphysical significance for its native inhabitants, the Diné or Navajo. For them, this was Dineta, the land unto which the first beings had climbed from the underworld. It is here, writes the Diné historian Jennifer Nez de Natale, that many of the events related in the creation narratives took place, beginning with the emergence from the lower worlds into the present world, the glittering world. The glittering world is not far from the Four Corners monument, but there might as well be an ocean between them. There's nothing much of interest near the monument, no eye-catching rock or gulch or canyon. Utterly indifferent to its surroundings, the marker sits upon a stretch of featureless, scrub-covered desert, like a thumbtack on a map. It consists of 2 straight lines, marked on a concrete plinth. Nothing could be less dramatic than this structure, and yet the crossing of the lines generates an uncanny power. Some stand to be photographed, some balance on it on tiptoe, some spread their limbs along the lines while trying to place their belly buttons directly on the point of intersection. One of them is a line of longitude that takes its base measure from faraway Greenwich in England, thereby invoking the imaginary homeland of the settlers who drew it. For them, the meaning of this landscape is derived ultimately from our dear native land, no matter how distant. For the Diné, on the other hand, every feature of the landscape is imbued with meaning. The 19th century Diné leader Barboncito once explained his people's attachment to their land with these words: "When the Navajo were first created, 4 mountains and rivers were pointed out to us, inside of which we should live. That was to be our country and was given us by the first woman of the Navajo tribe. These stories and the landmarks to which they're tied serve as a kind of scripture for the Navajo. Mountains are their cathedrals, their outcrops and arroyos are the equivalent of stained glass windows."
An artist's benefit party is the expression you are invited to, but decide that going home is actually worth staying the night. This space, this chemistry is an opening. Architecture is a surgeon of space, an empathic one, a vicarious sensitivity of dual divinity. Often a new philosophy means being in opposition to the status quo. So look around you, my friends. Look around you. You're within a conversation between architecture and poetry, between the material and immaterial, between futuristic delusion and delusion's nostalgia. We are in between because we know taking sides eliminates a side. This is all a powerful ask, an answer gone too far, the breeding ground of the inconceivable. We are a practice, ontological and observant. We are a practice. The world around us is built, therefore world building is an orchestration of materials or choices to join and detach. Imagine the geopolitics of cognition. Imagine the geopolitics of cognition. Imagine that cognition is a form of geopolitics of space. Oh, the politics, oh, how some organize a space to be comparable to the orchestration of muscles and tendons. We are the idea that is moving us. We are the idea. Architecture is a navigational system of survival. Even finished pieces of architecture are works in progress. Input, output, repeat. Input, output, repeat. Design is the offering of our own opinions, a wisdom of whims, thinking, which suggests that you just need a remembrance, a synapse for a bridal joint. Design is a memoir, finding reasons for the marrying of ideas. That's who we are. Factories of unactualized theories, all the ones that nod to who we are. An idea is all it takes, but the quality of care that this idea receives is dependent on empathy, on being moved by both sides. And this unfamiliar notion, this motion, is a language unlearning itself to be understood. People who speak in metaphors trust others less than they trust themselves. We shapeshift into an alias no one can recognize. Love is world building. Two biased feelings, two pessimists finding middle ground is actually better. Become an amalgamation. Become hybridity with me. Become the wheel, the turning point. This isn't about building better buildings, but instilling better negotiations of our own rationale. Stop the ostracization of cross-pollination. Stop the ostracization of cross-pollination. Stop the ostracization of cross-pollination. Everything we create, everything, recreates the totality of who we are. To make something is to make ourselves something even more. A renewed metamorphosis, a venture into the vernacular of conceptualized character. Architecture is a bifurcated philosophy. A body entangled with the past is the laugh a lock makes when the key won't work. Towards new frontiers, my friends, where perceptions are world-building blocks, a genesis formed from poetic, amalgamated intersections.
All right. For back in the mists of ancient times, in the great and glorious days of former galactic empires, life was wild, rich, and largely tax-free. Mighty starships plied their way between exotic suns, seeking adventure and reward amongst the furthest reaches of galactic space. In those days, spirits were brave, stakes were high, men were real men, women were real women, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri were real small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri. And all dared to brave unknown terrors, to do mighty deeds, to boldly split infinitives that no man had split before, and thus was the empire forged. Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of, because no one was really poor. at least no one worth speaking of. And for all the richest and most successful merchants, life inevitably became rather dull and niggly, and they began to imagine that this was therefore the fault of the worlds they'd settled on. None of them was entirely satisfactory. Either the climate wasn't quite right in the later part of the afternoon, or the day was half an hour too long, or the sea was exactly the wrong shade of pink. And thus were created the conditions for a staggering new form of specialist industry, custom-made luxury planet building. The home of this industry was the planet Magrathea, where hyperspatial engineers sucked matter through white holes in space to form it into dream planets, gold planets, platinum planets, soft rubber planets with lots of earthquakes, all lovingly made to meet the exacting standards that the galaxy's richest men naturally came to expect. But so successful was this venture that Magrathea itself soon became the richest planet of all time, and the rest of the galaxy was reduced to abject poverty. And so the system broke down, the empire collapsed, and a long, sullen silence settled over 1 billion hungry worlds, disturbed only by the pen scratchings of scholars as they labored into the night over smug little treaties on the whole value of a planned political economy. Magrathea itself disappeared, and its memory soon passed into the obscurity of legend. In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it. Now what? I wanted to ask you about the poem that you very kindly shared with us and with me.
I've got so many questions for you too, so.
I guess the most obvious question was, did it come from now? Did it come from this moment? And I should say, it's a very strange moment that we're in, just to acknowledge what I'm sure you all know, not only in London here today, but just generally. So this notion of world building as an optimistic act, is that something that you're drawing from today, or is it something you're trying to produce, or I don't know?
I think I'm always, and I want to throw that question straight back to you, but I think optimism in the current culture and context of the world we live in is a hard practice to deliver to yourself every day. There are internal and external reasons which feel like obstacles, which feel like oppositions, and this somehow autonomous self-talk convinces you that, you know, you have a power, but that can also be a powerlessness too. Yeah, so in some ways I am, again, in the tug of war between what is world building and the world that is being built for me to believe what could be created.
Right.
And the question back to you, which is, you know, with so many pressures and the gravity of pessimism, which, you know, becomes culture to certain extents, how do you world build optimism?
Hard question. How do I build optimism? Well, what gives me optimism and where I have to marshal it is with my students. I'm sorry if that's a trite answer, but I cannot take the weight of things into a classroom where I'm guiding young people and who have much more energy to give than I do. So there's a necessity to marshal hope, if not optimism. And the key thing about hope is that it is an act of faith. It's not based on knowledge. If we were looking for logical reasons to find hope, it would be pretty hard-pressed. But there are moments, you know, I think... I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking what scale to answer this question on. There are moments of resonance between people that definitely bring hope. It's been pretty hard for me in this country as a child of immigrants to feel comfortable, let's say since 2016 for sure, since 2015. But there have been, and since then, all these questions have been floating around. If they were dormant, if I'd managed to pacify them before, they kind of came rushing back, reinforced in 2020. But what we're going through now, I think, is much more shocking than lockdown. So it's these moments of resonance, for example, marching in step with people for causes that you believe in. That there are those moments that make you think, okay, things are possible. optimism is, this connection is real, and we have no self-interest. I think that's what scares me about world building as a term. As far as I understand, it's borrowed from science fiction, the world of video games, in which you're creating a sort of immersive sort of culturescape. And usually that's offered as a critique of what we're living in.
I like that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But if it's just the possibility of world building for the permission of authorship or authoring your own world, kind of like in the last bit that I just read, that seems to me to lean a little heavily into the cult of individual causes that we've got now. I don't want everyone to build their own little worlds and exclude to the exclusion of others, right? So yeah.
Oh, I've got so much to say. So, can I just get a show of hands of people who love architecture? There's a reason I'm asking this, I promise, okay? So it's not everyone in here, perfect, okay? I believe, and I think various, architectural theorists speak about how architecture is a form of world building, all right? You are knighting the decisions of a group of people from a particular demographic, from a particular education, to say this is the miniature world that we think should exist for an extended period of time, right? And if we think about it like that, world building in architecture is also a governance, right? A government body almost. And we've elected people or permitted people to be elected to create the spaces that we live within. So the only form of architecture which I think has true autonomy to a limited extent is our minds. And to double back to the question you asked me, which is, I think we are all psychological architects. I spoke about cognition being this duality and how love is world building, because it's almost like two oppositions trying to see each other's viewpoint. And it's the most extreme possible sport you could do with your feelings. And I think that level of appreciation for those who didn't put their hand up to love architecture, it has a strong mirroring effect to the architecture you consider to be your own actions and your own feelings, right? They build the world that other people live within. If you say you don't like someone's outfit, that's now a patina to how they wear their day. So my question is, again, to you, I feel like I'm throwing too many questions your way, but this is like the tennis match, which is, how do we enable people to become aware of that level of autonomy for the world they're creating? Because it's like step outside of yourself, but still be who you think you are. That's the hardest thing. I think fashion does that. There are architectural buildings that I'm so fond of. I think anyone who knows me knows I love the Barbican and Brutalist architecture. No, okay, I'm the only one. But it's how do we, again, I use art for this, but how do we enable people to realize they have so much autonomy in the world they're building within themselves and outside of themselves?
Again, tough and sometimes painful process, and God knows I'm going through that all the time, unbuilding my own worlds and having to reconstruct them, unbuilding my family and having to reconstruct it, unbuilding what I feel my space of agency is or isn't, constantly. So I do think it's a dynamic process, and perhaps in my head I'm kind of more comfortable with the idea of worlds, plural, building, which is just an awkward word to say. But these things are dynamic and plural. And I think how to, again, my students live in my head. I don't have children of my own. I have 350 of other people's kids in my head. And I think the thing to do is to make people aware of the fact that they are just structures that people have made up, that we accept as fact. And that's sometimes very painful, right? To tell people, you are taking part in a particular system that has been set up to privilege some and exclude others. And you don't have to accept this. You need to recognize that it's a construct. So whether that's a construct to do with gender or race or agency. And I teach history of architecture, right? So one of the first things that I tell my kids is, A, not to believe me. in my presentation of the world, and B, not to believe anything. I'm not just talking about fake news, I'm talking about the fact that histories are just narratives of systems that people have, particularly architectural theories, are systems of like, this should be like this, or this is because of this, and they're instantly fallible, instantly obsolete, instantly generative of other alternative systems though, right? That's the key. And I think once I can build confidence up in my kids to see those things as constructs and therefore give themselves to construct alternatives, that's the point. Yeah. Scary, it's scary.
Very, very scary.
Do you guys have any questions?
I was gonna say, yeah. There's like a couple questions. What? Yeah.
Thank you. That was beautiful, both of you. And as poetic and as abstract, especially when we're talking about world building in today's context. In both your practices, as an educator or as a poet, what do you end up negotiating and renegotiating every day as we live in with the kind of information we're living in and the changing environment around us? What is it that you're negotiating and renegotiating every day?
I love the way you looked at me like I had my answer ready. That
I have some.
yeah, you got some answers. Okay, I've got one. So
I mean, I don't think it's that when I'm thinking about my students or my readers, when I'm thinking about my practice as an editor. The bridge you're trying to cross, the struggle, is between, it's a struggle, between the struggle to survive that my students have, economically, mentally, to survive, and to connect with, and to be able to marshal still some energies to connect with bigger struggles. My students, and all of us, flick between how do I survive myself intact and how do I confront the world? And so obviously there are different scales, right? There's different scales of problem, there's different scales of health, there's different scales of energy that you can pull out. Some people can give a lot to themselves and some people can't. Some people feel that the outward projection to the world or the relationship with the world is what they are and haven't reconciled what they need to give themselves. So I mean, this is a very metaphorical way of speaking, perhaps, but when I'm thinking about the struggles that my students go through when they look to me for answers, a lot of the time it's, how do I engage with this world? What can I do? And these are students of architecture, so they are, at least technically or mechanically speaking, the world builders. And yet this is the confusion. How can I act on the world? And I suppose before we have to do that, as a life jacket, I have to tell them, before you act in the world, we have to survive. Right, so that's often the negotiation. In my own life too, personally, the struggle is with institutions. How do I retain my own agency when there is a system that has been set up for me to deliver in a certain way? Is that enough? No. So then how else do I put myself in the world? Give me a better answer. Give me your answer.
I can be really animated, and I'm doing my best to not be so animated. That was a great answer. It really was. And I think that there are things I want to kind of piggyback off the answer, but then what I'm learning in my practice is to allow things to exist and find that to be enough. Because when I create, there's always this deep root. Maybe this is like a idiosyncrasy in my head, but I feel like the art is not enough. And it's my lifeline, it's my blood, it's the thing that has made me who I am. But when we speak about world building, sometimes words change worlds, but not everyone's world. And my responsibility as a poet feels like I am everyone's responsibility, which is a very weird tension to accept every day. So I would say my negotiation within my practice, my core practice anyway, is learning how to bridge the common surface level understanding of something which is really, really deep and challenging towards what I would consider to be like ephemeral comprehension, like a spiritual connectivity, which is like the language of the permeable. You know, it's like the things you say, the things you feel, which find its way through what seemingly is impossible. I would say that that's a negotiation of trying to reach someone on the surface, capture them there, and then take them somewhere which, in my mind, in their mind, they think is probably not possible whatsoever. And it's hard because a lot of us like to stay who we are, where we are, and how we feel. But that friction, that marathon of perception, to be like, imagine what I could be like to the world, to others' worlds, if I became this person, or if I accepted a new notion of how I see myself. So, yeah, I guess my negotiation is I don't like using words which are so violent, like battle, you know, but sometimes a negotiation is mutual submission. Yeah, and you have to welcome it within yourself and hope that is a demonstration for the other person to say, I submit to the submission too. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We're tag teaming. Give me some love. Thank you.
Let me see if there's any more from...
Yeah.
I also bring it back to architecture if you like.
So I was, my name is Tony Patrick. I stumbled upon world building, or my particular practice, inspired by this in 2017, future of work, like world building residency in Los Angeles. Since then, world building has been participatory design for me. So it's been more of a community world building practice. And so to bring it back to you two, because this is, you know, part of my joy is sitting around a table with people from different walks of life and creeds and beliefs and more, and perspectives, and lenses, and building something collective, a collective vision around that. And then the alchemy comes in, right? So then you turn it into something, some kind of output. I wanted to ask how, because I got here late, so my apologies. Did you address participatory design in your practices? Or if so, how would you imagine that it would work for you in terms of your...
Tony, thank you. Really good question, especially because you write, right? And that you're trying to connect to so many people. You're trying to find a voice that would connect to so many people, but it's a solitary practice. I don't know, right?
A very scary one, which is why I like the practice of being around students.
Right.
It's so profound that you have the opportunity to be the torchbearer of legacy for many. That's your role. You are, and for even you to take away this sense of ego because I have knowledge and information which is of value, but you still say, question me in that exchange. Remarkable. I grew up in a time where I'm going to tell you what it is, you take it home, you're going to get an A for listening to me. Thank you very much. Yours is, I want to provoke your way of thinking.
Yeah, of course. That's how we're building, right? And so, yeah, when you talk about participatory world building, you know, over the last 10, 15 years, you see a lot in design practice, architecture and design practice that speaks about collaborative or participatory practice, and there are question marks over all of them. Much as I disagree with the possibility of a single author in terms of space, some of those moments some of those gestures of participation don't seem anything like as live as the world building that happens around a table, or perhaps, I hesitate to say in a classroom. A classroom already has a sort of hierarchy. This room has a hierarchy where you guys can't world build with us with quite the same ease, right? But that's one of the systems that we would try and question. And so in overcoming the lecture theatre, when I can get my students to tell me the worlds they come from, the worlds they want to get to, it's not my job to agree or disagree, only to build with, right? And I wouldn't survive without that practice of collaborative world building. I think where I start to get nervous is the notion of single authorship, or a kind of restrictive or exclusive notion to the idea of a world to the exclusion of others. But that live action of connecting over something. I'm much older than my students at this point, but we can connect over the sensation of something, or the presence of music history in a space, or many things in which our worlds overlap. I'm not going to quote political theory, but I think the Zapatistas have a theory in which there are multiple worlds possible and they must overlap. They overlap. This bottle looks to me in the way differently than it looks to you. It is a bottle made of glass and metal, and those things are facts. But our worlds projected from here and there are different. They meet at a certain point. And yeah, that is the joy of being able to create a space where that's possible, whether that's a physical space or just a space of trust. Right.
How much time we have? Because I've got a long answer, which I don't want to be a long answer, that same question.
It should be all the time for you.
All the time. Okay, remember you said this. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with my journey, and I say that in an attempt to be non-celebrity-like, okay? In 2016, I had this idea of running around the UK specifically and knocking on various architectural practices doors and saying, hey, do you guys need poetry? I want to do poetry for your practice. There was no fee attached. It was just, hey, give me a week, give me a month, and I'm going to create a program which essentially dissects an architect's approach to designing space for mental health, right? Big, what the hell? This is crazy. At the time, I was a little cuter with a big afro, so maybe it was a little shocking to some practices, but a few said yes, right? MSDA, Grimshaw Architecture, which was huge, and that process wasn't a quick process, because for what I presume you consider participatory design is a merging of multidisciplines, all right? My thought process is a discipline. Their thought process is discipline. We both turn those into practices. Mine is poetry, theirs is architecture. I'm essentially challenging them to say, this board needs to have a poet on it. For what may be clear benefits and may be ambiguous benefits, but let's see what comes out of it. Most architects work on definites. My practice isn't about that, It's like, I don't know what's going to come from the page. This is not a thing where I plan it out and I have the structure out unless it's for a book. This is, I need to find the resource in truth. So pushing past what is a commonality or practice for the profession, I've had to come and dismantle everything in a fun way. That's what I'm asking to do. There were many practices that didn't want to do that because they were in the flow of what is, having the form of progression, but I was looking at ascension. I wanted to take whatever approach they had, whatever pedagogy they were instilling, and elevate it. Because I think, James Baldwin speaks about those who suffer can help people suffer less. I'm installing that within the practices that I am welcomed into. And for Grimshaw, once they realized the impact that language could have, in a very welcomed excavation, there were architects who, again, everything is NDA, I don't mention people's specific names, but who spoke about, this was why I studied architecture. You've reminded me of why I studied this in the first place. And to think that a practice could almost inhibit your initial purpose to dedicate your life to something was profound to me, right? So my participatory design was almost, hey, I just want to show you who you actually are and how that can benefit the work you do, okay? So I think there has to be a delusion, because to decide I studied architecture, tell my dad, who's a Grenadian Caribbean Rastaman, hey, dad, me not want to study architecture, I want to do poetry. He didn't like it at all. And it took him probably 8 to 9 years to finally accept that there's a worth in it. So it's challenging someone to participate with you when there seems like there's no positive result. But that's the challenge of design. Yeah, sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
With that, we'll have to bring this absolutely amazing session to a close. But I just wanted to say, I think I can safely say on behalf of, am I audible? Can you all hear me? Yeah. On behalf of, I think, LTF and STIR, I just feel so honored by the way you have responded to this super scary experimental call. But thank you so much. And I hope that all of you will walk away with a lot to think about, but also a lot to feel in your gut, in your skin, in your hearts. Oh, so thank you. A big round of applause, please.